Good morning. I'm Don Burlett, president of Oakland Audubon Society, and I'm here to speak to you today about winter birds. And of course, that always focuses on feeding birds. So I'm here at my feeders to just give you a quick glimpse at what goes on outside while we're doing some bird feeding. So as you can see, I have a variety of bird feeders behind me, and they range from peanut feeder, suet, thistle tube, thistle sock, platform with sunflower seeds, another tube with thistle, a tube with safflower, mixed seed, and a mixed seed on a platform. And then, of course, on the ground, I've spread around thistle and some mixed seeds for the ground feeders. So this is really the important area for birds in the wintertime, especially when the ground is covered with snow like this and access to food is a bit more difficult, especially for those species that don't find fruit trees or berries like that to feed on. So this is a good start. From here, we'll head back inside and we'll start my presentation and show you some of the other interesting aspects of winter birds.
Well, here we are, folks. Welcome again. This is Don Burlett from Oakland Audubon. Our talk today is going to be on winter birds and feeding birds in times of need. So what I'd like to do is go through the program. And so what I'll do is first I'll give you some background on me and Oakland Audubon. I'm then going to talk about birds that you can see in the wintertime. I'm going to talk about how do you attract them, especially at feeders during the winter, what kind and where to place the feeders, what kind of food to offer for the birds that are out there, taking care of the feeders, and then eventually we'll talk a little bit about your yard as a bird feeder, and then a few other aspects to pay attention to as far as winter birds is concerned. All right, so moving along. First off, I'm president of Oakland Audubon, and I've been a lifelong birder. I've birded all 7 continents, and I've birded 41 countries in that process. So I've seen over 50% of the birds of the world. My number is at 5470, which is good, but not the best. Also, Oakland Audubon is a birding and conservation organization. We offer field trips, programs, we have a website, we have a Facebook page, we have a newsletter. And our goal is to obviously take people outdoors, get them to appreciate nature and understand it. And at the same time, also encourage our people to volunteer to support conservation efforts that are going on both locally and nationally and internationally. So it's widespread. So that said, let's talk about the birds that you can see in your backyard. So we'll start off here with this first group of birds, and these are finches. And of course, the goldfinch that you see on the upper left-hand side is the American goldfinch, but in his winter plumage, not the bright yellow that you normally expect to see during the summer. And next to him is the pine siskin. Again, it's another little finch-like bird. It's got a much smaller pointed bill. It's got some yellow on the wings and on the edge of the tail, and very streaky. And this is one that can sometimes confuse people when it shows up at a feeder. The 2 below that are the house finches. The house finch male is the one with the red on it, a little bit of a brown cap, very streaky underneath, except on his breast. The female is streaky brown. Her bill is a bit bulkier than that of the pine siskin, so she's a little bit, sometimes a difficulty, but should be easily separated because she doesn't have the yellow and she has a bigger bill. The next set of birds are the purple finches. The male is very purple, very pink on the face, and that's all the way down onto the nape and the back. A lot of color there on the male. The female, again, is brown, streaky. The differentiation between the female of the purple finch and the house finch is the face. You can look at the face of the house finch, and she's got a very even brown colored face, whereas the purple finch, she has a very distinct white eyebrow, which is very easy to tell. Again, very much more solid streaking on the chest, etc. So those are a little less common at bird feeders, but they are possibilities. Okay. For those of you who live in urban areas, good old house sparrows, the male and the female there, pretty common. If you're lucky, you don't have too many of those coming around. One of our winter visitors is the American tree sparrow. He's not here during the summer. He's only here during the winter. Brown cap, gray face, a little bit of a bar mark, has a little bit of a spot on the chest, and very nice and kind of rufusy brown on the wings, which makes him easy to see and tell apart. Another visitor that comes through in the fall and the spring, but sometimes a few will stay in the winter, is the white-throated sparrow. And the same can be said for the white-crowned sparrow. Occasionally they'll come through. They're a lot less common to hang around than the white-throated sparrows. And then of course the fox sparrow is a nice big, bulky, gray, very rich brown bird. There's several different color patterns. And again, a few of these will stay during the winter, but not as many as the tree sparrows. So we move on to the woodpeckers. Obviously, two very common woodpeckers that are seen around feeders are the downy woodpecker, the most common, the hairy woodpecker. Difference being hairy woodpeckers are larger, about 40% or so larger than the downy woodpecker, larger bill. And if you ever get to look at the tail feathers, they have the little white outer tail feathers. The hairies are completely white. The downies usually have some spots on those white feathers. The next three are regular ones. The red-bellied woodpecker is our most common large woodpecker that comes around feeders during this time of year, especially at suet. Not to be confused with the red-headed woodpecker. It's got a nice red crown, but the face is gray, black and white striping on the back. Northern flickers, a little less common, but occasionally come in depending on where you are. And if you're very lucky and have some nice woods nearby, you can get a nice pileated woodpecker coming in, the biggest of the woodpeckers that we have in this area, and they're very distinctive. Then we have other groups of birds. Here's a group of 4 birds that are all the ones with crests. The northern cardinal, I have the male and the female, the male being the nice bright red one. And then you have the blue jay and the tufted titmouse. The tufted titmouse is much smaller than the blue jay, even though this picture makes them look similar in size. These are all common birds that are very often seen at feeders. Then you have your black-capped chickadee, which is very common. Your white-breasted nuthatch, our Oakland Audubon logo symbol, is very common to see feeders. The cedar waxwing, not so common at feeders unless you're putting out some berries or some fruit, something like that they can eat. And another winter visitor primarily is the red-breasted nuthatch, which will be seen mostly in the wintertime, but occasionally during this time of year. Then there's other birds, and again, these depend on what kind of habitat you have. American crows will show up sometimes to pick up bird seed, peanuts, whatever is available at the site. Mourning doves come in for seed. The slate-colored junco, or dark-eyed junco, is a gray bird with a white belly and a pinkish light-colored bill. Those are winter birds that come in only during the winter. This is their southern ranges in this area. And then again, if you're in urban or semi-urban areas, you'll see probably a lot more our European starlings coming into your feeders. A few that are not quite as common, the eastern towhee. This is a bird that we see in the summertime. Some of them hang around, and they're very distinctively the black body and the brown, the reddish or orangey underneath, with some white marks on the chest and a little bit on the wings. These birds usually require a little bit of habitat nearby for them to skulk in and quietly sneak in and steal some food. Red-winged blackbirds, they will hang around early in the winter, but they're usually gone by the worst part of the winter, like right now. Rock pigeon, depends on where you are, whether you see a lot of rock pigeons coming to your place. And even wild turkeys. Again, cover is needed for these birds to be able to approach feeders so that they feel like they're protected and not exposed too much. Less common birds, which come down fairly frequently in particular years and may or may not visit feeders. Pine grosbeak, possible. Red crossbill and the two-barred or the white-winged crossbill. These are probably less common to be seen at feeders, but if you have a natural habitat and you have some pine trees, you might see those. The common redpoll will come to feeders occasionally. I've had them at mine, and they're the little guys with a red cap and a black mark underneath their chin. And we'll also have the evening grosbeak, which had an eruption this year, so that there is an opportunity, and I have had them at my feeders. So there's a possibility to see those. Finally, we have the predator. This is the guy that hangs around the bird feeders because the birds are coming in to feed, and the birds are his food. So if you're feeding birds, you can also be feeding a Cooper's hawk, which will come in and grab a bird occasionally. So these are all the birds that you'll probably see on a regular basis if you're watching your feeders and seeing what's going on in your yard. Okay, so how do you attract birds to your house? And feeders during the wintertime is one of the main ways to do that. But there are several ways to attract birds to your yard. One is to make your yard attractive to the birds, just generally with having the trees, the bushes, and the plants around, which are possibly serving a lot of different things. These will provide food for the birds, shelter from predators, and even nesting opportunities in the regular part of the summer and the spring and fall. Feeders are the additional food source that you use to bring in birds in the wintertime when it's a little more difficult for the birds to get the food that they're looking for. If they can't have access to the ground where their seeds are going to be, then they'll look for bird feeders and other sources that are easy to get to. This is why you oftentimes will see some birds feeding at the edges of the roads where the bushes have some seeds and stuff that they can feed on there that's accessible and not completely buried in the snow. Okay, so you've decided to put some feeders up, so what are you going to do? There are two criterion for placing your feeders during the wintertime. And this is, you want to think about a place where you can actually see the feeders, because there's no sense in putting them up if you don't get to enjoy the birds that are coming to them. You also have to pick a safe location. So there's some criterion relative to the house and the predators that you need to pay attention to. For example, windows, you need to either get the feeders really close to the windows, so less than 3 feet, so the birds, when they leave the feeder, if in a panic, they can't get a lot of speed up to cause serious injury if they come into the window itself. Other than that, you want to get about 30 feet away from windows, so that there's a long distance that they don't have to worry about running. They can see what's going on. And if you have windows that are going to be causing birds to run into anyways, where they can see habitat on the other side, it's good to put up the bird patches or some sort of device to keep the birds from coming to the windows. The other part is to pay attention to the fact that predators are going to be about, especially those friendly Cooper hawks. And so you want to have some natural cover near the feeding location so that the birds can duck to that in case they need to. So don't make it too close to the bushes or trees, because sometimes some predators can actually use the trees to have easy access to the birds that are really close. So usually about 10 feet from cover is a good compromise. So you give them space to operate, but they can quickly jump into the cover immediately out of the area of the feeders. So that's how you place your feeders. So now we get to the subject of feeders. There are lots of different feeders, and those a lot because of different types of foods that you're going to feed the birds. And different foods are going to be used for different birds. So we'll talk about feeders that are designed to work specifically with certain species of birds and the food that they need. So we'll go through these very quickly, or well, we'll go through them reasonably well. Trays or platform feeders, these are used for birds to land on and be able to pick the seed on the feeder. A screen bottom for the food is good, because that, if there's any kind of problems with weather, etc., they can, the moisture can go through the screen and not stay on the food, and then hope to keep it from getting bad. And usually you don't want food on the platform feeder for more than 1 to 2 days. Beyond that, there's a possibility of it getting spoiled and causing some problems for the animals that are going to be there. And again, these kind of platform feeders and tray feeders need to be frequently cleaned so they can maintain good health for the birds. These are usually good for juncos, doves, jays, chickadees, titmice, cardinals, blackbirds, sparrows, and finches. All of those birds will all eventually come into a platform feeder. The house or hopper feeder is another option. Here, the food is enclosed so that you can try to keep it dry. Unfortunately, these are also harder to clean than the platforms, so you have to pay attention to that when you make your choices. And again, finches, jays, cardinals, chickadees, titmice, etc., will all use these types of feeders. Tube feeders is another option, and these can be either solid tubes, or They can be made out of a screen or a fabric or a cloth or something like that that allows the birds to get the food through those screens or cloths. So there are different foods and different types. So on this particular slide, there's a tube feeder on the upper left, which is a goldfinch feeder. And you can see that this is set up so that the birds have to hang upside down to get to the openings where the food is. This will be very specific to keep other birds from doing it. So goldfinches will primarily be the ones that will use this type of feeder. If the pins are set up so that the bird can sit on the pin and still have access to food, then you get house finches and potentially some other birds. The upper right is a peanut feeder. It's a mesh. The bird can land, grab a hold of the screening, get its piece of food, and then leave. The bottom is a different version of a tube feeder where the birds are able to access the food on a little platform below the tube. And then on the lower right is the thistle sock, which is used for goldfinches, etc., where they can land on it. And this is often the place where if I'm going to see a siskin, it's going to be on a sock feeder. It's not going to be on the thistle tube feeder. So this is good for, these types of things are good for finches, chickadees, titmice, starlings, jays, and woodpeckers. Anybody that can hang on to some of these feeders will be the ones that will be using that kind of food. Another type is a suet feeder, and these can be cages or webs of a design of a cloth or plastic. They're designed for birds to cling to the device and then take the food. Cages are a little bit safer than the nets because sometimes birds can get their leg caught in a net, and that can be a problem. These get hung up there and they become instant food for a Cooper's hawk coming in. Typically, woodpeckers, nuthatches, chickadees, jays, starlings, etc., will come to these things. And the bottom picture here shows a suet cage, and it's on a platform feeder. So this will allow some other birds that will land on a platform to come over and take suet also. And again, these types of feeders have to be cleaned periodically. Okay, what kind of foods to offer? Sunflower seeds are very popular with a wide variety of birds. And there are two types. Black or oilers is a thinner shelled, which is easy for most birds to take and get the seed out of. The striped sunflower seeds have a thicker shell, and these are a little more difficult for birds like house sparrows and blackbirds to get at. So if you're trying to stay away from house sparrows liking all the sunflower seeds you have put out, then you want to use the black or the oilers or the white, the striped ones to keep them from coming in. The problem with sunflower seeds in shells is the shells accumulate on the ground. Usually some birds will just come in, popping the shells and dropping the shells on the ground, and you'll have a little pile of stuff build up underneath there. And the area underneath also will attract squirrels and chipmunks and other stuff. So this is one of the things you have to pay attention to with these. And this will require some cleaning underneath the feeders to do that. And then, of course, there are shelled sunflower seeds, and they're just like, you'll have to use those in a bin type feeder or something, or a tube that's set up to contain them and not just have them run out. Niger or thistle, popular with small finches. There are several types. Some are actually thistle, while others are plants that produce a similar food. Seeds are heat sterilized so that the seeds won't drop to the ground and start growing thistle underneath your feeder, so that's good. Usually this is in tubes or socks or mesh screens, and so you'll want something that'll allow the birds to get to it and it won't spill all over the place. Sunflower seeds, we talked about those. White proso millet, this is popular for cowbirds, blackbirds, and house sparrows. So if you don't want house sparrows and cowbirds and house sparrows to come to your house, don't use this material. It's best, this is only used on the ground or a platform and should be avoided probably most of the time. Also, cracked corn is popular for some larger birds and many animals. I would limit the use of this at the feeders because it can draw in all kinds of stuff. And it's bad enough that my feeders already have deer jumping the fences to get into the feed area when there's a lot of snow on the ground. If you put cracked corn on the ground, that'll make it even worse. So avoid the cracked corn if you can. Peanuts are very popular with jays, crows, woodpeckers, chickadees, and nuthatches, a whole variety of birds like these. There's two choices, shelled and unshelled. Shelled, tube feeder and a mesh, And then they should be um, definitely not have them around for more than a couple of days because they can spoil. Unshelled peanuts, you put those in platform feeders, and that's for them, the more industrious of the birds who are willing to drag this shell off and try to break it open to get to those peanuts. Again, keep all your peanuts dry to avoid toxin development. This is the thing that you really have to pay attention to. Suet, this is usually beef fat, but other forms are available. This is used primarily in winter, and it can go rancid in the summertime, especially when it gets warm, so watch that very carefully. They're often mixed with fruit and other seeds as part of the suet. And so I've been told if you can dissuade starlings by hanging the basket, but I have a basket out there with suet in it and starlings land on it and do it anyway. So I don't know if there's much of a way to avoid that. There are other foods that are available, safflower, fruits and jellies, which those are probably primarily a summer thing, especially the jelly, some fruits. If you had some berries, you could put those out there and some birds would probably take them. Peanut butter is also best only in the winter, simply to avoid problems with it sticking to the bill. You can mix it with cornmeal to make it a little bit easier for the birds to handle. And mealworms, if you're really into that, you can use them on a platform, and you need to pay attention to that, maintain those. So with all these different types of bird foods out there, cleaning is important, as I've mentioned earlier. Clean the feeders at least every 2 weeks, more often in wet and bad weather. And the way to clean it is to wash, or actually sometimes even soak the feeders in 1 part of bleach and 9 parts of water. Thoroughly clean with a scrubbing to get as much of the stuff out of there that you can. Then rinse thoroughly, make sure you've washed all the bleach out of there so there's none left at the end, and then dry it before you put it back out for use again. And then I also recommend highly that you clean the ground underneath the feeders. Again, the buildup of seeds there can be very unsanitary, and if birds are pecking amongst all that crap that's underneath the feeder, looking for the few seeds that are good, they can pick up something that's been growing in that feed area. So that's very important. Your yard is a feeder. This is an important aspect. I mean, I really do think that planting native plants in the yard to provide both cover and nutrition is really important for the birds. The picture here shows a nice backyard with flowers and trees and bushes, and it's a nice habitat for the birds. With planting, you can also set it up for fall and winter feeding. And that means planting some trees that'll have, or some bushes and stuff that'll have berries and stuff like that, and serve as a year-round feeder for your birds. Some bird-friendly yard foods, trees, you can plant crab apples, apple, black cherry. Shrubs include serviceberry, nannyberry, Virginia creeper, viburnum, even staghorn sumac is usable by the birds. And even grasses for some of the birds that like grass seeds. Blue stem, fountain grasses, etc., are viable for adding some pictures or nice looks to your yards and still provide birds with stuff that they can feed on. So, in conclusion, overall, feeders are a very important area to offer an opportunity to observe birds and maintain a healthy bird population. If you have good feeders, keep them clean, the birds will come and they'll enjoy it, and you'll have them all year round. Winter feeding basically is a supplement to their natural diet. So there are times in the early winter, if it's not a lot of snow on the ground, that there'll be a little bit less birds showing up. But every time there's a snowstorm and the ground gets buried under snow, the birds will flock to the bird feeders since they know there's a food source there. They're fun for everybody to watch, and that's the part of it that you really get to enjoy. But it does require some care and attention to the food supply and the food source and the cleanliness of that area. So at this point, I would say go for it, set up your feeders, have some fun, and enjoy the winter birds. And if you're looking for additional resource information, we do have at our website listed here, www.oaklandaudubon.org. We do have some information there. There's some sites there that you can go out to and look for information. There's one also from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, allaboutbirds.org, and a variety of other internet sources. So you should be in good shape to go out there and find anything else that I haven't mentioned today and get your birds feeders set up and go forward from there.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed the talk. I hope that I've let you know that there's a lot of things about taking care of birds in winter that are important. not only using the feeders, but also planting the natural plants around the yard with the berries and stuff that help supplement a lot of these birds. So with that, I'm going to leave you and say, go get them, go feed the birds, enjoy them, and make the most out of winter. Thank you.